Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations. One of the questions I enjoy getting most often about our company, about North Group Consultants, is sort of an incredulous, where do you get these people? And what those folks are most often referring to is maybe they've gotten an email or an announcement, or they heard that so-and-so was coming on board as a consultant at North Group. And of course, I smile. I love that question. And often a follow-up question I get, and it's sometimes inferred, not necessarily asked to me directly, is, what are you doing hiring a school principal or a banker or even a medical doctor? Which leads me to welcome my friend and my colleague, Kevin Lorah. Kevin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, you and I have been acquainted now since, 2015 maybe? 16,
right, yeah,
somewhere in there?
Yeah.
And you joined us here at North Group in?
2018.
In 18.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason I opened with those couple of comments is because they both really apply to you, and you probably got them as well, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You were very well established and well known professionally. Obviously, had a lot of education and certifications and all those kinds of things that went behind your medical career, which we'll get into. People had to ask you at some point, "What are you doing?" Do you remember getting that?
Oh, absolutely. Most people just thought I was retiring.
Okay.
So I was 58 when I came here, and they said, "Oh, you're retired. Now what are you going to do?" I said, well, I'm actually just changing careers. I'm not retiring. I'm going to join North Group. So that would just open up the questions of, well, what's North Group and why?
Yeah. Give us a little background. I mean, you're Lancaster County born and bred, and you never really strayed too far from here. But at some point, you must have gained some academic chops to make it through. I mean, how do you get from Cocalico High School to where you ended up in the medical field?
Yeah, I got that same question actually when I was interviewing back here in Lancaster for a job. When the CEO said, "You went to Cocalico?" don't hold that against me. They prepared me well for the next step, which was Kutztown State College back then. Now it's Kutztown University. And then Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia after that. And then I went to a pediatric residency up in Danville at Geisinger.
Okay.
Syracuse in upstate New York for neonatal fellowship. And then I always joke, I got my first job when I was 31. So,
it takes that long, doesn't
after
it?
years of training, yeah. Obviously, I had jobs in the summer and other times.
Yeah,
but
sure.
My first job as a doctor.
What were the indicators along the way that pushed you into the medical field? And of course, you were mindful of the fact that you don't get to the type of calling that you were in with just getting a high school or a college degree. It's a much longer path, and at some point you must have decided, hey, that's worth it. I'm going to pursue that. What were some of the pushes for that? Some of the impetus for that?
Yeah. For me, I was not one that when I was 6 years old knew I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
I wanted to be a baseball player.
Yeah,
That's really what I thought. That'd be pretty cool. And then
how'd that work out for you?
Not well. Yeah. So my career lasted until about third grade, and then when I was sitting on the bench in Little League, it was like, maybe I should think about something else. Yeah, so no one in my family was in the medical field. Really didn't have any other guidance there, but just the desire to work with people, but not knowing what field. And then again, each step helped clarify the next step after that. So when I was in medical school, I enjoyed pediatrics as well as family practice and seeing children in family practice.
You mentioned earlier, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that you got your first job when you're 31. So you just kept going with this, with your education becoming more and more specialized along the way, and that was a step-by-step thing too?
Exactly.
Okay.
So after 4 years of college, then it's 4 years of medical school, 3 years of pediatric residency, and then 2 years of neonatal fellowship or postdoctoral fellowship. So all those add up to when I was 31.
Did you get married during that period of time?
I did, yes. So when I was in residency, I got married.
How did you meet Diane?
So Diane and she grew up in Lancaster County as well,
Okay.
but she was down in Virginia. She had gone to college and then graduate school and had a job in Virginia. And we met back here in Lancaster at a wedding of
Okay.
mutual friends.
Uh-huh.
And
she was willing to hang in there with a guy who wasn't going to get paid for 10 more years.
she was very patient and tolerant.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we ended up getting married when I was in residency. So she moved from Virginia up to Danville.
That's when you were living in Danville.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you moved to Syracuse?
And then Syracuse for 2 years.
Okay.
And then went back to Danville on staff after I finished my training. Geisinger was my first
So that was your
job.
first actual employer?
Yeah.
And what position would you have been hired into?
Yeah, a clinical neonatologist.
Okay.
So responsible for directing the care of sick and premature babies in the
Okay.
Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, part of a team.
Want to go to the family side here. You and Diane have 4 children.
We
They're
do.
grown now.
Yep.
None of them are biological.
Correct.
Adoption, I believe, is just a wonderful calling, wonderful gift. So thank you,
You're
for
welcome.
that. But yours aren't even adopted from the same country or even the same region of the world, I don't think.
Correct.
If you don't mind, talk a little bit about what you and Diane needed to work through to get to that point. That was how our family was going to be put together. And then how much of that was spiritually driven? How hard was that? A couple of your children have some, what people might think of as limitations or limited capabilities in some areas. Just fascinating stuff. How did you navigate all that together as a couple?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was interesting. We got married. We were in our later 20s, so we weren't young teenagers or just out of school.
Sure.
We both had a desire for children. Interestingly, both of us had a heart for adoption even before we were married.
Really?
We each had thought independently before we even knew each other, yeah, maybe someday it'd be nice to adopt a child or, build a family that way too. As Diane and I were young married and we were not getting pregnant, and this is now 35 years ago, so the diagnostics, the testing wasn't as sophisticated as it is now.
Okay.
It was considered idiopathic infertility, meaning we don't know a reason for, we don't know why.
Okay.
But they also didn't know whether we would eventually become pregnant or
That
not
always
either.
sat out there as a possibility.
It sat there as a possibility,
Okay.
Yeah, we just didn't know. But we were both eager to have children, so we started the process. So again, the doors that opened for us were international adoption to an agency based in Quakertown.
Okay.
And we pursued that. And then Michael, who's now 33, was our first child.
And where did Michael come from?
Michael came from South Korea.
Okay.
And interestingly, he was a premature baby and spent some time in a neonatal unit in Seoul, South Korea.
How about that?
So
you needed to go to South Korea for that, I guess, right?
No, in fact,
really?
In fact, 30 years ago, they did not allow adoptive parents to travel to Korea. They always escorted the babies over to this country.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So after Michael, we knew, too, that we were interested in more children and started to pursue, but the agency said, well, you have to wait for at least 3 years. And even then, there might be other families brought in before you. And we were both open, too, from the beginning of special needs children. And we said, well, we're interested in, considering a special needs child. So it was fairly soon after Michael came that we found out about Daniel, and they're 11 months apart.
But they're age-wise, they're 11 months apart.
11 months
and
apart.
Did you get them roughly 11 months apart?
A little. It was probably 15 months.
Okay.
Yeah, Daniel was a little bit older when he came home, but they were pretty close.
Well, you and Diane aren't shy of taking on a challenge, evidently. I think that may recur here in our conversation. And there's two more.
There's two more. Then
from the
we
other
had
side of the
two girls
gender
after
equation.
that. Yeah. So Daniel's also from South Korea. Christy, our older daughter, is from South Korea. And then we were interested in another child, and the doors that opened up there were in Russia.
Wow.
So our youngest daughter, Karina, was in a Russian orphanage, and then she was adopted, and came home.
If someone were listening to this and you hear a variety of stories, a variety of outcomes, a variety of circumstances with respect to children in general, but certainly there's a few more things going on there with adoptive families. What would you say to prospective adoptive parents?
One is, this is just how the Lord chose to put our family together,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not in control.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in control biologically of when
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy may happen unless it's very planned. But in general, there are things out of our control, and that's where
Just accept that.
Accept that, and the faith and the belief that things work out, and the Lord has His reasons for timing that we don't understand. But just and persevere in the process, because it can be a long, sometimes drawn out and rigorous process.
When did you move from Danville back to this area?
Yeah, so actually after Danville, we moved to Northern Virginia for a few years as well.
I forgot that. Okay.
So I worked at Alexandria Hospital for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then had the opportunity to come back and work in Harrisburg. And interestingly, too, Diane always had a desire to live in the Hershey area. And I said, well, I'm not in academic medicine. I'm not a researcher. I'll never be working at Hershey Med Center. So, Hershey may be nice, but that's not going to happen. But of course, again, the Lord has a sense of humor and Diane's desire to live there. And sure enough, I could work in Harrisburg and we could live in the Hershey area.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're coming up on 30 years back in this area.
A number of years ago, I was working with a client company and was there quite a bit and got to know, obviously, a number of the employees, fairly well. And one of the employees, their managers there, was a very impressive young man. He and his wife, and you're going to know where this is going to end up, had a lot of children, 7 children, I think. And they were going to have a 7th or an 8th, I don't remember the number now. And it ended up that the baby did not survive, and the mother needed to carry the baby to term. And I remember being at the funeral, and just what a wonderful testimony, I guess is the word, and just the community surrounding them. And then I don't know if a year went by, well, it'd be more than that. A couple of years went by, and this manager, this employee, came in to meet with me here at the office, and he saw you. And I don't think I ever met with him that day, because it turned out you know who I'm referring to.
I do.
Probably we'll leave their names out of it, but it leads me into this question of. I guess I would think that specialist medical people like yourself get a tremendous amount necessarily of clinical training. But somewhere along the line, you developed this gift. And I don't know if you're going to agree to this or not, but we have had numerous people come into our office over the years and refer to you as a absolutely pivotal figure in their life at one of the most difficult times during their life. How did you come by that level of care? And was there a point at which almost that ability to work with families under the most difficult of circumstances almost trumped your clinical talents? Am I asking a reasonable question here?
You are, and I don't have the answer.
I'm asking a question.
I was going to say you have a question, and it's a very reasonable question. I don't have a specific answer, but I can think of a number of things that have been impactful in my career and pathway. One was actually very early on during my training, during my fellowship up in Syracuse, and we had a young family, and they had a baby that was just born on the limits of viability. So we would say borderline viable, extremely premature baby. And the baby was in the neonatal unit, and at a point was not doing well. And when I'm talking about this age baby. They're born at about 1 pound. They're tiny. We need tiny equipment. They're very, very fragile, and any little movement sometimes can make their oxygen levels go down. And the equipment we use is tiny. And just as an example, the amount of fluid we would give a baby to sustain them before they can eat and give IV fluids is about half a teaspoon an hour. And that's what sustains them over that period of time. So there's very small margin of error. And back then it was believed too that because of how fragile they are, minimal handling was the best approach. Don't disturb them. If they're stable, leave them be. So this baby was on minimal handling protocol, but was not doing well, was deteriorating. And at that time too, and this is again 30 years ago, we would obviously have frank conversations with the families and let them know things weren't going well. And that was the case here. And at that time, we usually offer the mother the chance to hold the baby too, as difficult as it was to move the baby and all the equipment, everything into her arms, to give them that opportunity. And sometimes it could only be for a few minutes. In this case, a colleague of mine was taking care of the baby and had the conversation, and the mother had not held the baby before, and said, yeah, I'd like to hold my baby. It might be the last time I have a chance to do that. And she did. And instead of a few minutes, she ended up holding the baby for a few hours. And the oxygen level started coming up. The baby's blood pressure was better. The baby became more stable. And, what a lesson, what an experience. As much training as we have, as much medical knowledge, we're not in control.
Wow.
And so that was really impactful. And just realized the impact it had on the mother, on the family.
Yeah.
And the baby ended up, surviving, being discharged from the NICU and going home.
The baby survived.
The baby survived.
Born at 1 pound.
Yeah. And
you might
that was one of the impactful,
Yes.
Lessons that we have to provide excellent care. We have to do the clinical side of things, but we also need to care for the families.
Yeah. And at some point, you became that person. How do you explain that?
It's just the experiences and the faith, the belief in God, and God has a purpose.
Yeah.
And, to seek and serve Him, what is our purpose and what are we called to? Yeah. And, I just felt I've been very blessed and very fortunate, thankful for the education I have. And yes, they certainly need competent clinicians, but they also need compassionate caregivers too.
Yeah. At some point in your distinguished career, you reached the point where you thought, I'm coming toward the end of this. What were some of and that, of course, was when we got in touch, so we'll get back to that. But what were some of the things that indicated to you that maybe it was time to consider an end to your medical career?
Yeah. Yeah, and that also was gradual, as most things were. It wasn't a lightning experience or anything. But as I was getting older, I certainly still enjoyed the clinical aspect. Actually, for 24 to 27 years in healthcare, I was part administrative, so involved in administration and some leadership roles. And just felt as I'm getting older, there's probably some other opportunities where I could be doing something different and serving in a different way.
So you were acquainted with a couple of North Group folks along the way, just not direct to North Group, but just people that you had met in the community or through LCBC or something like that. And at some point, somebody started a conversation with you.
I had heard of North Group and the leadership development that you provide. And actually, it's another Cocalico grad, Daryl Izey, that I reconnected with and just said, I'd like to learn more about North Group and what do you do there? And would you ever consider hiring an old doc that needs some new tricks? And so we started a conversation that ended up being 3 years.
3 years? I was going to ask you how long.
Yeah.
And I think in your case, we did have to think through what are the transferable skills here? What did that feel like to you? Because it was building on those skills, obviously your character is impeccable. Was it hard to make the transition?
For me, it wasn't. And it did take time, though, to figure out where the similarities were between healthcare and consulting at North Group. And even as I was going through the process, Diane asked too, really? Consulting? Is that where you're heading? And I think because of the unique team you have here and the work that is being done here, it was like, no, there's some significant similarities here between walking with families in the NICU and on their journey there, and as you described, walking with businesses, with family businesses in their life. So, and it kind of got narrowed down to a number of specific points and areas. One being uncertain outcomes. We don't know where things are going to end up. So there are uncertain outcomes. There's incomplete information. I'd like more information. Yeah, well, we don't have time for more information, whether that's in healthcare or whether that's in business. We need to make some decisions. And then just assessing what are the priorities and the options that we have at this point. And then after really just putting that together of making difficult decisions, and this is what we feel is the best decision with the information we have at this time, making that decision, taking the next step, and then reassessing. Yeah. So when we think about NICU, the course in a NICU for a family and a baby, and the course of a business or a family business, there's some real similarities there.
Yeah, and I think over the years, not as much so now, 27 years in business, but, first 5 or 10 years, I would have people that knew me fairly well, and maybe had even had a little bit of exposure to North Group. I was going somewhere with them out for a meal or play golf or whatever, and say, Roger, what do you actually do? And of course, I think people think of it primarily in terms of we're business consultants, and we are, although not in a traditional sense. And just in the last 30 hours, you introduced me to a client of yours, and it was a father and son. And you've been working with that business for 3 years maybe now, something like that. And it was just so affirming for me. We stood outside my office there and listened to these gentlemen talk. And I turned to the younger of the two men, and just to learn a little bit more about him, I said, do you have a family? And his first sentence out was, well, my wife just passed of cancer 6 months ago.
Yeah, 8 months ago.
8 months ago. You were there. I mean, you were there for that family.
And again, like you said, we've had a relationship for a number of years before she was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And then walking
and this is a young man. He is in his 30s.
Yes. Yeah.
With children.
Right. 4 children. Yeah.
That had to be one of the times when your unique background and all the experiences you had with families in traumatic situations had to benefit all parties involved. True?
Well, I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, they certainly gave testimony to it. I could have gone home. I was 11 o'clock in the morning. I could have gone home that day and felt fulfilled.
There were times when I first transitioned over here and said, well, I've gone from individual baby health to organizational health, which was true. But organizations made up of individuals and of people. Yeah. And it's the individuals and having the relationship, knowing what's important in their lives and what their values are. Yeah. And walking with them, whatever their journey might be.
Just to close and to affirm you, which you know I'm going to do, not to embarrass you, but the thing that comes through to me beyond obvious high development of Christian and personal character that you've developed is you listen first. You are a very good listener. I often felt, you and I traveled together for a year for a client that took some time to get to. And often after we would have a meal together or something, I would feel selfish. I would think, I'm a pretty good listener and I ask a lot of questions in my profession. But when I'm with Kevin, I get out-listened and out questioned. And before I know it, we're going back to our separate hotel rooms. And I've been doing all the talking. And I think that ability to be calm and peaceful and patient and listening well developed, no doubt, during those critical times in your family life probably, but also in your professional life, have served you very, very well here at North Group. And I think that's why so many of our clients are attracted to working with you.
Well, thank you. And I have to acknowledge it's not all altruistic, my listening. I prefer not to talk. So I find if I ask a question, the other person can answer and talk, and I get to listen. So
that's why we get along so well. Kevin, this was just a joy. Thank you for agreeing to have this very personal conversation with us. You know you have my deepest admiration and that of our colleagues, and appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you, Roger.